Hi everyone, my name is Thomas and I am 58. I want to share my tragic story with you. It's all about how I spent close to 2 decades of my life in prison due to my actions, or you may choose to say inactions, as a result of my wife cheating on me with a friend and business partner of mine. When I was in my teenage years, I watched a lot of movies that had to do with martial arts. I lived with an uncle of mine who bought tons and tons of these movies, and all I did was watch them over and over again. Suddenly, I began to develop a high interest in Taekwondo, and I told my uncle about my growing interest in the art. Kindly enough, he enrolled me in a Taekwondo class that was held 3 times a week somewhere not too far from our neighborhood. I did very well, and within a short while, I became very popular and notorious in my neighborhood due to my aggressive stance. I wasn't really aggressive for any reason. I got aggressive with you if you tried to assault me or other innocent and vulnerable people who couldn't defend themselves. As though that were not enough, I decided to learn both wrestling and boxing at the same time. I had secured a job as a bartender in a bar at the time and had started making some money. From time to time, I used part of my income to purchase video drills and other resources that would enhance and bring out these skills in me. Soon enough, I became a combative person and wouldn't just take any shit. I grew into adulthood that way, even though I then began to apply some measures of maturity, restraint, and caution. Due to my muscular and combative nature, I found myself becoming a bouncer. I had worked as a doorman and supervisor in several venues and event centers, such as bars, nightclubs, cabaret clubs, strip clubs, cabaret clubs, strip clubs, casinos, hotels, and sporting events. The list can go on and on. I can't really count the number of times I've hauled out drunks and troublemakers from clubs and discos, and they paid dearly for their misbehavior. At one time, I was the major doorman in a cabaret club, and some guys came around to make trouble and disturb the peace of the event. Their major target was a beautiful and elegant dancer named Lisa, who really entertained the clubbers that night. The guy in question claimed to be her boyfriend and accused her of cheating on him and breaking his set commandments. Or you can say orders. He vowed to beat her up and strip her naked before the crowd. He had 3 other guys that sheepishly followed him behind to carry out this mischievous plot. When they started disturbing the peace of the event, I called him aside and talked to him as a gentleman, pleading with him to change his mind and respect the sanity of the crowd. Besides, I reminded him that Lisa was a celebrity and the major highlight of the event, and it wouldn't be fair for him to try to embarrass her before her fans. But he will not listen. He suddenly mobilized his boys, and they tried to break through the crowd to where Lisa was seated to physically assault her. Quickly, I and my team swung into action and accosted them. Suddenly, a serious fight erupted, and there were gunshots and knife stabbings. The whole crowd was thrown into confusion, and there was a huge stampede. I quickly made my way to where Lisa was to protect her, and this guy came around to assault her, and I ruthlessly engaged him in a fierce battle. I never knew he held a trench knife. As we struggled so fiercely with each other, he swiftly brought out the knife and stabbed me in my chest and shoulder region. He made his way to grab Lisa and possibly strangle her, but I managed to take him off the ground with a deadly kick, and he fell to the ground. I quickly smashed his neck with my feet and took Lisa to safety. All of a sudden, I found myself unable to stand on my feet anymore. I was bleeding profusely as a result of the knife. Suddenly, I collapsed and passed out. Lisa stood beside me, screaming and crying for help. Luckily, my team members quickly came around and lifted me off the ground into a car and drove me straight to the hospital. When they got there, the doctor said I'd lost a lot of blood and that my chance of survival was very slim. They did their best to stop the bleeding and dress the wounds, but I couldn't regain consciousness. They had to do a blood transfusion before I finally regained consciousness. I was surprised to see Lisa by my bedside when I woke up. I actually stayed on for a good 3 days, and she was with me all through. When I was out of the hospital, I got to know the truth of what led to that whole trouble in the club that night from Lisa herself. She said the guy in question wasn't really her boyfriend. According to her, He wanted her so badly, but she kind of turned him down, and then he vowed to mess her up. Long story short, Lisa fell in love with me for saving her life that day, and she told me to be her man. I, in turn, found her really fascinating and interesting, especially the way she danced and performed. Without much ado, we started dating. While we dated, she went on to perform at different clubs, parties, and events, and I kind of became both her manager and bodyguard. One day, we were in a nightclub with a few of my friends, and she performed so well and blew the hell out of our minds. When she was done, all of my friends rallied around her to cheer and celebrate her for a job well done. Then they all started to chant, "It's high time you tie the knot, chap. It's high time you tie the knot, dude." They kept chanting for 1 or 2 minutes, and I got their message. Within a short while, I married Lisa in a simple court wedding, and we moved into an apartment I rented in a government, reserved area of town. Our marriage was full of fun and bliss, and I felt privileged to get married to a celebrity like Lisa. I eventually became her official manager and booked her for events and performances. I had a friend called Travis. He owned several nightclubs, and we had a deal with him. He had fully booked Lisa for the next 3 months to perform in his nightclubs around town. It was a huge deal, and I was sure we were going to make a fortune out of it. I was still going to be his chief bouncer at most of these events, while Lisa went on to perform. Soon enough, the event premiered, and Lisa was all over the place, performing and thrilling her fans and spectators. Due to the different locations and distances of the clubs, it got to a point where I could not necessarily accompany Lisa. Simply put, we couldn't be at an event at the same time because I was also engaged in some other venues where Travis hosted other artists and performers. All these developments started playing out in the second month of the contract. I never knew Travis took advantage of it to play a fast one on me. He began to sleep with Lisa when she was done performing. He kind of brainwashed her by promising to double the agreed amount of money, and also offering her a home in Hawaii. Unfortunately, Lisa fell for his Don Frecken trap. For the remainder of the 3-month contract, they secretly had an affair, and Lisa pretended so well that she succeeded in hiding it from me. Soon enough, the contract was over, and Lisa had to stay down for a while. We rested for 2 weeks, but trust me, that period was one of the sucking moments of my life. I had a lot of quarrels and altercations with Lisa because she suddenly changed. She kept on communicating with a guy I knew nothing about in a secret and offensive manner. When her phone rang in my presence, she stood up immediately and left my presence to go answer the call, either in the bathroom or the backyard of our house. She suddenly changed the password on her phone and denied me access. When I come close to her when she chats or browses, she tends to suspend it immediately, all in an attempt to hide her nefarious acts from me. One day, I went to the grocery store to buy some provisions, and I left her at home. Upon my return, I heard her having a heated argument with a guy on the phone. I was wondering who he could possibly be. She never knew when I got into the house. So I tiptoed and came close to the doors to possibly know why she was challenging the guy like that. I heard her accusing the guy of not fulfilling his promises. She went on, "You promised to double the payment we signed for the deal and pay the latter into an account we agreed upon. I provided the account, and you've not dropped a dime there yet after having me this much. How about the house you promised to buy for me in Hawaii? When is it going to happen? This has been over a month now since we ended the contract, and all you do is demand more sex and make fake and empty promises. Just to let you know, I am not that cheap and worthless article you could mess around with." Then, I guess the guy on the other end began to apologize and brainwash her. You know what I'm talking about. She kept silent for a while as he spoke. Suddenly, it dawned on me that this could be Travis, my friend. I heard her talking about a contract that just ended, and he was the only guy we had a contract with in the last 3 months. She still kept mute and listened as he talked on, and suddenly I could hear her chuckle and laugh as they concluded the talk, and she hung up the phone. Immediately, I knew Lisa was cheating on me with some guy, and I seriously suspected Travis. I felt pained and disheartened by this sudden development. Someone I nearly lost my life trying to protect had all of a sudden turned her back on me and had gone to sleep with another man, out of greed and materialism, or whatever you may choose to call it. If not for my intervention, she should have been 6 feet beneath the ground by now, maybe, completely putrefied, and the same as the soil. I could only imagine how ungrateful and wicked humans can really be. Please forgive me for generalizing. Maybe I should have said some humans. I decided I was going to dig down through this whole matter until I found the whole truth. I moved away from the door to the sitting room and sat there, frustrated and disappointed. Suddenly, Lisa opened the door and walked into the sitting room. She was surprised to see me sitting down there. I also quickly sat up and smiled when she opened the door. She happily announced that Travis had renewed the contract and signed her up for another 3 months. She said he would call me shortly. I pretended and smiled along with her. But then I finally confirmed my suspicions about Travis. It was clear that Travis was the guy she had been talking with on the phone when I walked into the house. It was clear that he'd promised her both heaven and hell in exchange for sex, and she bought into his lies. And he had her as much as he wanted. I quickly began to plan my revenge. I decided I was going to sign the contract again and spy on them this time around, possibly catching them red-handed. The day I catch them red-handed, I'll squeeze Travis with my bare hands, I said. Sure enough, he called, and we sealed up the second deal. Soon enough, Lisa started performing in his clubs as usual. But I had set up an espionage team to spy on her movements and get back to me. The first and second weeks came and went, and she eluded my espionage team. Then I decided to plant a spy among Travis' men, and I finally succeeded after trying so hard for a month. One night, Lisa was to perform in one of his nightclubs, and I was working in another. Suddenly, I received a call from one of the men I had clandestinely planted among his bodyguards. He told me Travis had asked another artist to perform that night in place of Lisa, and they were already on their way to Palmfield Beach, probably for sex. Immediately, I delegated someone to work on my behalf, and I left for Palmfield Beach. It was already late at night, but the moon was shining so brightly, coupled with the bright stars that littered the sky. In no time, I was there, and I disguised myself in the best possible way I could and walked through the shore in search of them. Suddenly, I stumbled on a pop-up beach tent where I sighted a man and a woman fondling each other in a deep romance. I immediately drew closer to the tent, and when I looked more closely, I discovered it was Travis and Lisa. I got angry and pounced on them. I held their heads in each of my hands and furiously smashed them against each other, and they both fell apart and fainted. In anger, I thought Travis was only pretending and took a bottle of wine they had in a basket and broke it on his head. Then I held Lisa by her neck and strangled her. Still in my fury, I dismantled the tent and used the rods to weep for both of them. They screamed and shouted for help, but their screaming could only go so far. No one really came to their rescue until I was done venting my fury. Suddenly, I was surrounded by a group of researchers who were conducting a normal inventory of turtle nests around the beach that night. They were attracted by the screams they heard and my roar and fumes as I assaulted Travis and Lisa. They were both in the pool of their own blood and lay lifeless. Suddenly, it dawned on me that I had just murdered 2 people in cold blood, something I'd never done before. Immediately, I bent down to check if they were still breathing. I shook Lisa, but she did not respond. Then I turned to Travis and shook him with every ounce of strength I had, but he just lay lifeless and wouldn't respond. "Oh my God!" I shouted. "What have I just done?" I stood up immediately and tried to escape, but I was immediately accosted by those researchers, and they quickly called the police. In a matter of minutes, the police were on the ground, and I was handcuffed. I looked at Lisa and Travis lying lifeless as a result of my assault, and I couldn't forgive myself. Immediately, I forgot about the enormity of the offense they both committed against me, and just realized I had taken the law into my own hands and had gone overboard in doling out my revenge plot. I was trying to catch the culprit or offenders, and I have suddenly become a culprit and an offender. The police officers asked me to make a statement explaining what exactly happened. I told them the lady was my wife and the guy was her lover. I told them she had been cheating on me for so long now, and I caught them red-handed today. But I was overly infuriated and got it out of my mind to assault them in the manner I did. I said I never thought they were going to die. Suddenly, I burst into tears and cried a lot, and they watched me in total bewilderment. In my presence, they called another team of medics who swiftly came around with their ambulance and took the corpse to their facility for possible resuscitation. I got to understand later that they couldn't be resuscitated. A forensic analysis was carried out on the two bodies to further ascertain the cause of their deaths. Meanwhile, the police took me to their station, and after 2 days, I was to stand trial in a court of competent jurisdiction. They asked me if I had a lawyer who could probably plead my case before the jury. I had no lawyer at hand. They then advised me to hire one, which I immediately did. Soon enough, I was in court, and my lawyer stepped forward to plead my case. But the judge and jury concluded that my case was obviously a felony assault, which was a big crime against humanity. I was left with no choice but to appeal and was immediately sentenced to a 15-year jail term with a fine of $10,000. I was completely devastated and wished I was only having a dream of the night. What an irony, I thought. I saved Lisa's life by preventing some guys from physically assaulting her, and I ended up being the one that killed her by a physical assault. I just couldn't comprehend it. As I sat in the prison cell, I cried day by day and regretted my actions. I should have at least spared her life. It could have been better to have her alive even though we were separated so she could bear the consequences of her actions. But now she's gone to the great beyond, and all I'm left with is this unending guilt and imprisonment. I even wished she could come back to life so I could forgive her and remarry her again. But it just couldn't happen. It was too late. I thought of how to spend 15 whole years locked up and confined to a building and just couldn't wrap my head around it. But sadly, that had become my reality. My family members blamed me for my actions, and I had to apologize to them in tears. Lisa's parents and siblings immediately cursed and disowned me for killing their sister and daughter. Travis men had vowed to come after me, even when I eventually got out of jail. I lived the next 15 years of my life in utter guilt and regret. It was as though I would be spending 1,000,000 years in jail. But eventually, I completed my jail term and walked out. But for fear of getting killed by some of Travis' men who could still be around town, I decided to relocate to another city to start my life all over again. 5 years later, I got married to a beautiful lady from Chicago, and our marriage is blessed with 2 children, a boy and a girl.